Hey friend, and welcome to another episode of Christian Podcasting Secrets. I'm Tammy Munson, your podcast coach, cheerleader, and a little bit truth teller today because we are talking about keeping it real on your podcast. We are diving into why authenticity is the secret sauce that can take your show from meh to amazing. But first, let me ask you a question. Have you ever listened to a podcast and thought, wow, that was just what I needed to hear today? Friend, that is the magic of authenticity. It's what makes podcasting feel like a warm hug on a tough day. And as Christian podcasters, we have an incredible opportunity to connect with people through our realness and our faith. So whether you are getting ready to launch in 2025, maybe you've just launched this past fall, or you've been doing this for a number of years, I want you to stick around because we are going to talk about how to keep it real, why it matters, and how it can completely transform your podcast. Plus, I'm going to share a few tips to help you lean into your God-given story. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, a quick little side note before we dive into all things authenticity, but I wanted to let you know that our annual survey is still happening. It's running until December 15th, and I need your help. Seriously, it's super quick, less than 2 minutes, and y'all, it's not one of those boring long surveys that take you forever to do. It's just not. So this is your chance to tell myself and the team at Wildfire what you love, what you want more of, and how we can serve you better. Not just here on the podcast, but across all the other content that we put out, as well as any new products or services that we offer through Wildfire Creative. So think of it like helping me plan the ultimate podcast party. So head on over to wildfirecreativecompany.com/survey and let us know your thoughts. We'll be putting that link in the show notes as well. But I promise it's going to be the easiest thing that you check off your to-do list today. Promise. And you'll get some major brownie points from me as well. Okay, let's dive in. So if my voice sounds a little off today on the show, it is because I went to a concert 2 nights ago, and it was my beloved Pork Tornadoes. I absolutely love going to their concerts. But let's get started with a big question. Why does authenticity matter, especially in podcasting, right? Imagine this. You're sitting down with a friend who is so polished and so perfect that every word she says feels rehearsed. How long do you think it's going to be before you check out of that conversation? Now, imagine that same friend being vulnerable, tears, sharing her struggles, and just being her real self. Now, that's the friend you want to talk to all day long, right? And podcasting works pretty much the same way. When we show up as our authentic selves, it builds trust. And trust is the foundation of any strong relationship, including the one with your audience. Now, I love how Jesus has modeled this for us. So think about his conversation with the woman at the well, John chapter 4, verses 1 through 26. He didn't shy away from the truth, but what he did do is he met her where she was at, but with compassion and authenticity. And that's what we're called to do, to meet our listeners where they are, to be real, to be authentic, yet compassionate in all things, right? But let me share this. I get the opportunity to listen to lots of different podcasts with lots of different episodes and topics. And as a producer, I also get the opportunity to dive into a lot of the analytics of those podcasts. And it's one of my favorite things that I get to do. But here's one thing I can tell you for sure, is that listeners today are done with overly scripted, perfectly polished shows. They're just done with it. They don't want to hear it. They want to connect with that person. They want to create community with them, especially when they're real people telling real stories. In fact, there was just some research that just came out from Edison Research that showed that 73% of audiences are drawn to podcasts that feel relatable and genuine. They don't want the fluff anymore. I personally have never been a big fan of fluff, but the majority of audiences are tuning out those perfect things and are willing to have a little bit of less than perfect audio. So a while back, one of our podcast clients had a very, very big guest on her show, and nothing went as planned. The internet was spotty. They had a dog barking in the background. The host accidentally spilled coffee right in the middle of recording. There was just so much stuff in this one audio. And at first we were like, well, let's scrap it and redo it. But then we thought, no. So instead of editing out every little thing, we kept some of those moments. And you know what? Her audience loved the episode. It was her highest rated episode. Now, that sent a message to her and to us that reinforced that the conversations that we have need to be real and authentic, that they are right there with us, making mistakes just like the rest of us do, right? And this reminds me of one of my favorite verses, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Now, as an Enneagram 8, I don't like to show weakness, but what I've learned over my last 50 plus years here is that sometimes our weaknesses, our challenges, things we don't perform at 100%, they're actually the biggest teachers. And sometimes we need those less than perfect moments that allow God to shine through the most. So don't feel like everything needs to be perfect. Now, I have said this more times probably on this show, and if you are a client or have been in a collective or mastermind with me, you have probably heard me say there is no perfect audio if you're not in a podcasting studio with a audio engineer managing the audio. It's just not going to happen. And even with an editing team, it's still not going to sound 100% perfect. My voice right now, I could have scrapped this and did something else, but I felt this was important. My voice is not perfect, but what this needs to be talked about, because I see a lot of perfection in podcasting, just like we see perfection in social media. And I'm not going to get into the whole social media thing, but it's about story. Let's talk a little bit about your story. What do you bring to the table? What is something that God has brought you through that you can share with your audience? And we've all been through stuff. Some of us a little bit more than others, but we've all had those moments. You know the moments I'm talking about. For me, it was earlier this year when I decided to bring this podcast back and rebrand the entire thing. I didn't know if it was going to work. You would think with 20 plus years and working in podcasting, but still, it was a little terrifying. What if I fail? Am I really ready to do this with what our family had been through in the previous 10 months? But the moment that I shared that fear with all of you on the very first episode that I did when we came back, you responded. And when I shared about how God showed up for me during that process, something clicked. I started getting messages from others that said, that they were experiencing something very similar to what I was experiencing or had experienced. And that it gave them the courage to take that next step, whether it was starting their podcast, moving over to video, to include video in their podcast, to go back to school, to start the business, whatever it was. And y'all, that right there is the power of sharing your story. And it doesn't matter if you have a similar story to me or to your favorite podcaster. Your story is unique, and it is a story that only you can tell. So how can we show up to better share our stories? For all of my overthinkers out there, stop. I know that's easier said than done. But you want to start by answering a couple of questions. 1, what is a recent challenge that God has helped you overcome? 2, how did that experience change you? And 3, what lessons that you learned can teach your audience? In Psalm 139, it says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And it's true. Your story is unique. And I guarantee you that somebody, even if it's one person, needs to hear that story. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is all great, but how much is too much to share? It's a really great question, because there is a very fine line between being authentic and oversharing. Sometimes as an Enneagram 8, and I'm sure all of my Enneagram 8 friends out there will agree with me, sometimes we get a little oversharing. But for example, let's say that you are navigating a tough season in your marriage. And while it's so powerful to share how God is currently working in that area, you may want to avoid diving into every little detail while you're still in the thick of it. Because some moments are just sacred and the world just doesn't need to know all the things. And the other part of it is God may still be writing that part of your story. So when you are deciding what to share and what not to share, of course, you always want to pray beforehand with anything and ask the Lord to guide your words. And you want to focus on what is going to encourage and uplift your audience. Don't focus on the specifics, but instead keep the spotlight on the lessons. I want you to make sure that you protect your heart and the hearts of those that are involved. But don't be afraid to let your audience see your humanity, because everything you do flows from it. Okay, so y'all know I love practicality and I love good action steps for those quick wins that we're always talking about, right? So here's a few of them that is going to help you embrace authenticity in your podcast. First of all, I want you to reflect. Like I said, spend some time praying or journaling about what part of your story you've been hesitant to share. Ask the Lord for what He wants you to share about. The answer may surprise you. In fact, when I was planning to share about coming back and what I've been going through, there were parts of that story He said, do not share. And I didn't. Tip number 2 is experiment. In your next episode, try sharing an unscripted thought or maybe a behind-the-scenes moment. Just talk off the cuff, because that's usually when the authenticity comes through, especially if you are writing your script. I know there's a lot of podcasters out there. They are using AI to help them write their shows, and we'll get into that in a future episode, because y'all know I have thoughts. And you're reading it word for word. Sometimes throw a little caution to the wind and just riff for a moment. See what comes out. You never know. Might be really good stuff. Tip number 3 is ask for feedback. I want you to reach out to your audience, like a survey, and ask what they love most about your podcast. You'll probably be surprised by their answers. It also helps you guide content for 2025, the next quarter, the next season, whatever it is. And here's the really important thing. Authenticity is not just a podcast strategy. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's a ministry. And so every time you are sharing your story, you, my friend, are giving God the glory and inviting others to experience His grace, His love for us. So before we wrap up, don't forget about filling out the survey. You can find it at wildfirecreativecompany.com/survey. And thank you so much for spending time with me today. I know it is a busy season. It is Christmas season and there's all the things. And I appreciate the fact that you spend time listening. So if this episode resonated with you, I would love if you would share it with a friend and leave a review, because reviews and shares mean the world to me and it helps more people discover the show. Again, thank you so much for tuning in today. Remember, I want you to keep it real, keep it faithful, but most importantly, keep sharing your story. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next Wednesday. Merry Christmas, y'all.